I gotta tell somebody.
This is the best thing I've ever seen.
That. Let's talk about that.
You need this. Listen to this.
Memorable and exciting.
Well, then be less boring.
I'm going to tell everyone. Wait here.
Mighty remarkable, Big Daddy.
Remarkable.
Welcome to Remarkable, a podcast for B2B marketers that deconstructs the most iconic moments in film, television, pop culture, and advertising for a single purpose: to give you, the B2B marketer, the same storytelling techniques that the pros use. In each episode, you will learn techniques from Hollywood, Pixar, Marvel, and beyond, from Spielberg's hands to yours, bringing remarkable content ideas to you every single week. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. This is Remarkable. And this week, we're talking about B2B marketing lessons from the book The Terror by Dan Simmons. Is it Simmons or Simons? Who knows? By Dan Simmons with the help of special guest JumpCloud CMO Micha Hershman. Micha, how are you?
Hey there. I am great. And it is, in fact, Simmons.
Well, there we go. And by the way, I didn't realize that this was adapted as well. So I found that out in my research here. We're going to talk about marketing. We're going to talk about the terror, talk about content and everything in between. But first, Micha, why the heck did you pick The Terror?
The Terror has so many great themes and scenes in it, which, we'll definitely dig into. But the single scene that I come back to every week, and I have since I read this book more than a decade ago, it's a scene where that captain, they've been in this horrible situation for a long time, and he gets his leaders together, a couple times a week in that dark hold of the ship to have his leadership meeting. And he sits them kind of in ranking order around a table. And he has, he's like, we're frozen in the ice. We have no food. We're dying slowly. What are we going to do about it? And he starts with the most junior person, and he just looks at them and then they give their opinion. And he does it by design, right? The most junior people speak first, so they're not intimidated and they don't just parrot the ideas of the most senior people. And he goes all the way around the room, hearing from every single leader. He doesn't say a word until the end. And he just says, thank you. I've heard everything you have to say. Here's what we're going to do.
There'll be no melodramas here. Just live man. Or dead man.
And I think this is just such a great model for how leaders can and should, act in these kind of situations. Like, let's make sure the junior folks have a chance to weigh in. They don't feel intimidated. Let's hear from everybody. Let's acknowledge and say thank you. Let's digest a wealth of different perspectives before we take on that mantle of decision maker and go. And I've always thought this was such a great scene. I talk about it all the time with anyone who will listen.
I love it. It's leadership in a nutshell, right? It's, you got to deliver the bad news and then immediately start to get results oriented right away and gather as much info as you can. I love that. It's funny. It's not that this exact scene has been making the rounds recently, and maybe it's just because in doing research for this episode, I've been seeing it more, but someone the other day posted about this sort of like leaders talk last sort of a thing, or the CEO talks last thing. And I'd never really heard of it sort of explained in that way before, and it makes so much sense. But yeah, it's just funny that I've seen that on like LinkedIn a few times, and I've talked about it recently. It's just, and then here we are talking The Terror.
Yeah. And it's so counterintuitive in some ways. You think the leader is the person who's always going to step up and speak. And in fact, those are my least favorite meetings. When I came on JumpCloud, like all the team leaders would drive the team meetings, and that's fine. It's great to hear from them. They're experts. They're knowledgeable. It's kind of boring. It's like we've got, another 35 or 40 people who have perspectives we don't hear from. It's not super inclusive. It's such an interesting idea, right? Of like, you think about leaders leading from the front. Well, a lot of times we just want to sit back and let the team, drive, and we can help when we get stuck.
Yeah, I think it also speaks to, as you start to dissect it, all of the different things that come about. Well, if you have so many people on the call that people can't say, maybe your call is too big. If the call is super unstructured, or like people are talking about everything under the sun, was that the purpose of it or was it not? Like, it gets at all these other elements of creating a really successful meeting and culture and all that stuff, that by sort of just focusing on, this one thing is how can you collectively hear from everyone and then make your decision, rather than just being very top down.
That's right. And then maybe one final point on that, like, it also, anybody who studies this stuff knows there's lots of different kinds of meetings. But I think this model that I articulated addresses one particular kind, which is the decision-making meeting. Like, there's dissemination, there's brainstorming. That's none of this. This is like, we got a problem, we got lots of perspectives. What are we going to do? Let's resolve this and get moving.
Yeah. While we're on it, do you feel like at times, especially in our digital remote sort of age, that perhaps younger or less experienced folks kind of feel a little bit put on the spot by this sort of thing? Or do you think that that's good or bad or indifferent or both? Or
Yes, and yes. So this is a true story. I joined JumpCloud 6 weeks ago. True story. The weekly leadership marketing team meeting was led by a handful of people, and it wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. It was actually quite good. But just last week, we rolled out this new agenda, which is leaders aren't doing the talking. The ICs on the team are reporting out on their progress to goal every single week. And then any key ideas that we should be excited about, things that are coming up. And it definitely causes the team to pause and be like, oh, wow, I'm on the spot. It's not that I'm just opining. It's that every week there's a very specific two things I'm talking about. How did my performance look to goal, and what comes next? And there's a bit of pressure there organically and by design, right? The point is to raise the bar, to make your performance transparent. Everybody can see what everyone's doing. We're not judging or tearing you apart. We're trying to help you hit your goals. Because if every member of the team does that and hits their goals, we're more likely to hit our goals as a team. And it does raise the bar for accountability. If you're missing your numbers, you can't just say, I'm missing my numbers. Mic drop. You have to say, I'm missing my numbers, and here are the 1, 2, 3 things I'm doing about it. So there is some pressure there. I think it's healthy. I think it helps to raise the bar and sets the level of excellence really high.
Yeah, it's something that, for us, Meredith could attest whether this works at all. But ages ago at Caspian, we had this idea to start our production sync rather than sort of coming from the top of going directly to all the producers and have them pitch their shows. This is how we did in the Army, is same sort of thing, is like, you pitch your sort of functional area, and then sort of like, the CEO in the case it's the commander talks last. And and just the act of having to tell people how things are going and give the status update beyond just, hey, what's up, but having that sort of directional goal was super important. And it's pretty easy to understand who knows what's going on for their functional areas when you are forced to sort of brief it every week. But we would do it with no slides or anything like that. It's just like brief the Excel file of where your show's at, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. We were used to doing slide decks, and I said, no decks. This is just a running Word doc. Just type your notes in. Like, there's nothing fancy here. The other thing that I think is interesting about it is it drives engagement in a different kind of way, especially in today's hybrid remote work world. You can sit through 90% of the meetings in your day and look at Instagram and do your other work and kind of half pay attention in the meeting. When you're on the meeting every week and you're called to speak to it, and your teammates and partners are called to speak to it, you have to put a little more in and be engaged in a little bit different way than you might normally be able to get away with.
Okay. Well, let me open it up. Meredith, what did you think of when we started doing that? I don't know if you'd already been there or if you came in on it. But
when I started, the production syncs were like very, very long. I remember that.
That is Meredith O'Neill, our amazing producer extraordinaire. Yeah.
And now it's gotten a lot shorter and more concise. It helped me as well as the team, I think, understand like what's next and what challenges we're facing and problem solve together too. So I really appreciated that. But yeah, I find it super helpful, especially for me to just keep track of where I'm at in the show too. So
Concise is a super interesting word. It's one of the challenges that the team was worried about, and the leaders were worried about that people just ramble. And so we got a 2-minute hard stop. And I think it's hard for some people. We got to come back and coach some people, but it's also practice, right? Opportunity for you to think about, how do I boil this down? How do I present up, get used to presenting to senior leaders? It's an interesting kind of after or side effect of the program.
Yeah, when I started doing it, because we used to do this when I was in the Army, so I had tons of experience on doing it both ways. But one of the things that in the Army we'd say is it's called a forcing function. It forces you to prep your stuff, right? And so part of the thing is like, do I have to prep today? Do I have to brief this? Like, no, you don't need to prep anything. In fact, I don't require you to prep a single thing. I just require you to know everything there is to know about your show, right? So it's like, however you do that, if you want to prep before the meeting or if you want to just know, it's like totally your call. And to Meredith's point, on the leader side, the reason why they were so long in the beginning is because we had a bunch of junior producers and they didn't know their shows well enough. And so you could just poke holes extremely easily. And there was also, other reasons to people weren't, didn't know how to brief as much and all those sort of things. But you just poke holes really easily. And it's like, hey, tell me about the episode that's coming out in 4 weeks. Just like, where's that at? And those sort of things that you sort of like learn how to do. And then once you get to the point where, later on down the road, it's like now it can be much more solutions oriented rather than sort of like poking holes at stuff. And sort of as a leader, you just know. There's a great lesson. One of my first early lessons in the Army was there's Alpha Company and Bravo Company. And my boss came to me and he was like, Ian, do you know what's going on at Alpha Company? And I was like, no. He's like, neither do I. They turn in their reports on time. It could be absolute pandemonium over there, but their stuff is always on time. He's like, Bravo Company is a total shit show. And I always have to go down there and check. And that's because their reports are late. And he's like, I don't actually know. Alpha Company could be the exact same way, but I never need to check on them. And it's like, that's like one of those things, right? It's like, if your reporting is good, then your leader's not going to, double click in every single thing that you're doing. But if it's not tight, then the opposite's probably going to happen.
It's really true.
Zooming out. Tell us about being CMO of JumpCloud.
Yeah, you got it. Well, first of all, what is JumpCloud really helps IT teams and what we call managed service providers help work happen in companies all across the world by centralizing management of user identities and devices, as well as kind of focusing on really enabling the small and medium-sized enterprises to bolster their security. So I'm not an IT expert. I'm not a subject matter expert. That's my plain English explanation. It's a larger sized growth stage organization, about 200,000 total customers. Some big names that you'd know, GoFundMe and Foursquare, etc. Been around about 10 years, raised about $400 million from great world-class investors, which was really a hook for me. I always like to see that when I'm applying General Atlantic, Sapphire, Atlassian, CrowdStrike, Sands Capital, bunch of great folks there. So it's a super interesting business. It looks a lot like technology companies that I've been involved with in the past, meaning SMB mid-market, looking to move up market. That's everyone's goal, especially in these last several years of kind of interest rate challenged environments. The same kind of challenges that I really like to tackle. How do you build a predictable demand generation engine that fuels sales pipeline and allows for growth? And how do you couple that with kind of brand building strategies to help differentiate you from the 25 other people out there in the market who do the same thing? So it felt like an organization where I could come in and take my learning experiences from, Envoy and Heap and Eventbrite and apply them in a way that I could hit the ground running real fast.
Meredith, what the heck is the terror?
So the terror actually started with a footnote, which I thought was really interesting. Dan Simmons, the author, said he wanted to write a frightening story about Antarctica initially. And so while he was researching, he was reading a book by this British explorer named Ranulph Fiennes. And that's when he came across the footnote. So Fiennes had written about skiing the entire North Pole from one end of pack ice to the other, which he also did in Antarctica. And he's got some crazy he's a record holder for things like that. And so Dan Simmons said the footnote mentioned the lost expedition of 1845 of Sir John Franklin's crew gone missing.
News is in about Erebus. While she can still make headway under steam, the flagship's efficiency has been compromised. How badly compromised?
And he said, I lit up and thought, that's it. And he said, I still owed my publisher one more book and told them what it was. And they said, no, we don't want it. This is about people who died a long time ago. We want something fresh. And he said, I disagreed and I wrote The Terror on my own. And it did find a nice home, and that led to the show. So not only is it a book, now it's a show as well. It's on AMC by the same name, The Terror.
As a trusted friend once put it, this place wants us dead.
And so the thing that I love about Dan Simmons is just from reading interviews with him, he's so stubborn and he has so much conviction, which Ian, I know we've talked about before on Remarkable, which is like these just like content creators who like have this idea, nobody wants it, but they make it anyway. And I think there's something to be said about that. So he said, one of the things I've worked hard to do in my 25-year publishing career and the 24 novels I've published is to reserve the freedom to write whatever kind of book I'm interested in writing. And he continued saying, my earliest career decisions as a younger published writer to continue to write the kind of book I want to write and not to bow to publishing or readership pressure to repeat myself, to make all final editorial decisions myself, and to take great risks, financial, career-wise, whenever necessary, have served me well. And that was like, I love it. You know, he's so strong-minded, strong-willed.
And so I told my editors excitedly that this is what I was going to do. I was going to call it The Terror after the HMS Terror. They went with the Airbus and got stuck in the ice and all the crew disappeared in history. And they said no. And it's the first time a publisher said that. I said, why not? I think it's going to be a pretty good novel. And they said, look, nobody's interested, and a bunch of people have been dead for 150 years.
That sounds like some of our meetings.
So I did what maybe you do in such a meeting. I just thanked them, and I liked them all. And I had a good editor, said goodbye, and bought back my last book on the contract and went out and wrote it on spec.
And just that, like, I think there's so much to take away from his words there, which is like, well, one, write fiction based on a true story or create content based on a true story, but it like sort of gives you the bones of the story, but then it gives you freedom to kind of imagine the rest and make it what you want. The second lesson I took was like, write the untold story or the little known story, which I thought was really interesting because it's just a footnote. It's a tiny little note at the bottom of some sort of bigger piece of literature. And the third lesson was like, create the content you think should be out there. And so I thought like so much can be said about just that interview.
It's absolutely hilarious to me that he goes to the publisher and they're like, who'd want to hear about dead people that died a long time ago? It's like, have you heard of the Titanic?
Yeah.
It's like the most popular like nonfiction event that has like happened that when my nephew was 7 years old, he was obsessed with, and my wife made him a Titanic cake. Like 7-year-olds are still obsessed with that 100 years later. Like, are you... Like, people are literally still dying going down there and seeing it. How could you possibly think that something like The Terror is not going to be interesting to people? It's just mind-blowing to me.
Micha, did you want to add anything? Or
I was just going to add in, it's like, it's
Yeah.
British history. Like, we are all obsessed with all the British history TV shows. And, like, there's so much to like in this book and the movie, or the TV show, which is also super compelling.
You must wonder what we're doing here in your part of the world. We are from England, very far away. We've come here to find a way through to China and India.
Yeah, it's just, I just think it is such an important reminder of like a story that you personally find so fascinating for some reason. Generally speaking, is probably worth telling. Now, the manner in which you have to figure out how to tell the story and create stakes and do all that sort of stuff, but anything where people are starving to death is like, generally speaking, or any type of expedition type story. Like, we love stories about exploring. We love stories about these type of decisions that have to get made. It's just crazy that he went to his publisher as an established author.
Right. Oh, the other thing I think I would add is he's kind of a reputation of writing on the margins in general. Like, yes, he's written science fiction and horror books, but they all bleed into each other. This book, I know it's a podcast, but I brought all my props. This book, Ilium and the companion, Olympus, is like Greek mythology and Shakespeare and Star Trek all smashed up together into this bizarre duology. And I really love the way that he just kind of writes on the fringes and smashes all the stuff up together that he's interested in.
Did you read him before this book, or is this the first book that you'd read of his?
I did. Like I said, I brought all my props. So his first book was Song of Kali, which is like a horror cult novel set in India. And I started with that. And then he's written his most famous series is, I think it's called the Hyperion Quartet, perhaps, or something like that. And it's actually been licensed for adaptation by Bradley Cooper's film company, Hyperion Cantos, excuse me. And it's like this fantastically inventive science fiction, epic, sprawling science fiction series. And that's where I went after Song of Kali. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to read everything this guy's written. And I had that. I worked for a publishing company for a long time. So I had the good fortune when Olympus came out to meet Dan Simmons and to hear him talk. And he is, I think, as Meredith described, I would say the word Meredith described it more polite. I would say he's kind of a crank. He's like got wild and strong opinions. The debate that I remember so memorable was him talking about the difference between sci-fi and science fiction and why it really mattered. And he had like strong, hot opinions on all this kind of stuff. So.
What was, do you remember it?
Oh boy. I think science fiction was, I'm going to screw this guy. If Dan Simmons ever hears this, forgive me. I think science fiction is a more traditionalist, Arthur C. Clarke kind of classic old school exploration, leveraging science to explore social concepts. Versus sci-fi was like a popularized television network to kind of churn out enjoyable but genre trash, which like there's probably a difference between those two things, but we just tend to, conflate the two.
That's super fascinating. Yeah, that's a really interesting distinction. I never thought of it that way. Whereas, I mean, it's funny that we create all these labels, right? It's like these were created by us. we can relabel them whatever the hell we want to label them.
Yeah, can and will forever.
Yeah, like Jurassic Park is science fiction, right? It starts with science, but there's no aliens. Like there's no, we don't go into outer space. Oh, that's interesting. Before we get into the actual story here, I'm curious, Micha, because one of the things that he is noted for is having this conviction and not bowing to publishing and not bowing to readership and wanting to make final editorial decisions and really just believing that if he thinks it's a story worth telling, it's worth telling. Whereas like when we're pitching CMOs and marketing leaders, a lot of times we're like, hey, we have this like really cool idea for a series, like when we pitch Murder in HR and things like that. And sometimes people just, get it. Other times people don't, which is fine. But sometimes I'll just say like, do you think this is a story worth telling? And I feel like so often where you were in the publishing world, and I know you greenlit stuff and were involved in that process, where it's like, that's it, right? Like that's the crux of the decision. Is this story worth telling? And obviously, is it going to make money is the second thing. Whereas like for a lot of marketers, like they don't ever even consider, is this story worth telling? And I think that's like kind of like part of the problem with some of our marketing is like, it's just not even worth doing in the first place.
Yeah. On the classic B2B SaaS side, the parallel I often draw is on the one hand, the vision, right? The founder's idea for what this can be and how it will disrupt and change the world, even though there's no appetite for it at all, right? There's no comparable products out there. And then there's the like super prosaic, our customers ask for this feature. We have to build this feature, right? Which is 100% data driven. And to find that right balance between like vision and satisfying your customer data driven needs is that always on pressure, right? Finding that right balance. There's some kind of art in it. And it's absolutely true in the publishing world when a book like The Terror comes out, what you do as a merchandiser or as a buyer, you go, what are other books like The Terror and how well did they sell? Well, let me tell you how hard it is to find another book like The Terror, let alone 4 of them, and then to average the sales and to plot a trend and to figure out how much inventory you have to buy. You just got to take some leaps, you just got to have a leap of faith. And that was one of the fun things about being in publishing is by me taking that leap and saying, hey, I'm going to invest a big portion of this company's capital, I can push this story to hundreds of thousands of readers who would never have seen it ever before. And that was by far the best part of my job in publishing.
Well, and so many things that do break out are singular, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to tell a story about children, and it's a young adult novel. And what they're going to do is they're going to do this competition. Oh, that sounds great. They're all going to try to kill each other. And the rest of the world is going to watch it on TV. And it's like, what? What do you think the publishers, for Hunger Games? And then it's like you read the first 100 pages of Hunger Games, you're like, oh, I'm never going to put this down. Like, there goes my weekend. But it's, so many things that do break out are singular. So it's like, what would you use comps for the Hunger Games? Like, I don't even know what you would possibly even do.
Yeah, so hard to do. A lot of times, you're just trying to find parallel data sets that may not be perfect, like what are their breakout authors, published by this publisher, in the young adult category did we have in the last 10 years? So you're always just trying to find something to compare that to. And it's the same thing we're doing on the B2B marketing side. Like, okay, this feature means nothing by itself, but like if we packaged it with 2 or 3 other interesting features and told the story this way, it could really perform like we saw last year when we launched, X, Y, and Z. It's all, storytelling and packaging and framing when it comes down to it.
Okay, Meredith, back to the story.
Sure. So I know Micha shared his favorite scene, but for listeners who haven't read The Terror or watched the show, it's a fictionalized story, like we mentioned, about the true disappearance of Sir John Franklin and his men who went on an expedition in 1845. And they're trying to find the Northwest Passage, which connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans over Canada.
We will see the North American mainland within a fortnight as we become the greatest Argonauts of our age.
And they actually went out on 2 ships, which I thought was interesting. Both of them disappeared. So it was the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. And they were considered like advanced for their time, these icebreaker ships. And they were planning to be out there for like 5 years. At least they had enough supplies to last for 5 years. And both ships, along with Sir John Franklin, obviously, and his 126 crewmen, all totally disappeared. So all of that is true. And it's followed by the largest search and rescue operation in history. And they never found them. So the story then is fictionalized in that Dan Simmons is writing about the crew and Sir John Franklin, what happens while they're out there. And so he writes that they'd become stuck in the ice near an island called King William Land, which is actually an island, and they had no hope of rescue.
You're in command. Of what? You realize that the discovery of the passage is beyond us now. That'll be left for someone who comes out. I don't know that. If the ships are still afloat come spring, we will have to retreat.
And then here comes sort of the sci-fi part, which is they're plagued by the attacks from this sort of like monster. And it sort of appears to be a giant polar bear, but there's something up with him. And so he seems like more aggressive, more vicious. There's more to it than that, but that's generally the story. But what I thought was interesting was Dan Simmons said, I wanted an external threat. Like he knew from the very beginning, he wanted to include this monster. He says, even before I started writing, I knew that I wanted something scary. I loved the 1951 Howard Hawks version of The Thing. And what I love is that they can't run away. And he said most haunted house stories or most like horror stories are sort of beaten by the simple fact that you can leave. In this case, the men can't leave. And so it's interesting that they're all sort of like stuck in this situation together. It's all about like what happens when people are suffering in terrible isolation and absurdly harsh conditions. And so it explores these themes of like faith and hubris and that sort of thing.
If you're wrong, we are about to commit an act of hubris. We may not survive.
You know what men are like when they are desperate. We both do.
So to talk though about Dan Simmons as an author, he's incredibly prolific. I think I mentioned he has like over 24 novels and more than that now. He has the series as well. He's a best-selling author, is award-winning. He sold millions of books worldwide. And somebody in one of these interviews asked what legacy he wanted to leave. And he's like, I don't know about legacy, but he's like, if he had I think he called it a literary epitaph. He said, I'll be happy if they say after I'm gone, he never popped out of the same hole twice. And so from that, I took like do something different every time, like keep mixing it up. Like I know, Micha, you mentioned like he's sort of melds genres and it's really hard to pigeonhole him. And that's interesting from like a publishing standpoint, but he really tries to do something different with every single thing. I think with the Hyperion series, some readers were like, will you continue the series? Because it was, it was super successful and people loved it. And he was like, I'm not going to, and no one else will be allowed to once I die either, was like his response. So he's definitely like you said, a crank, which I kind of love. But in this book in particular, Micha, I'm wondering, like you mentioned, like you took some leadership lessons from it. What about like creative problem solving? Was there anything to take out of that if you're ever like in the lurch with content or something like that? Any leadership takeaways from creative problem solving from this book?
Yeah, creative problem solving is a great expression. Another way that I often articulate it is lateral problem solving, which I think gives it a dimension, which I appreciate. I always imagine that boulder in front of you. Like you could keep trying to climb over the top of it, or you could just walk around it, right? Literally finding lateral solutions rather than trying to head on tackle the same thing you've been tackling. So first of all, 100% agree. I think that, perhaps the key theme in the book is survival and hardship and kind of finding solutions to difficult problems.
I'm sorry, but we mustn't stop until it is finished. I mustn't stop, and you mustn't let me.
And I do think we're all familiar, with the concept of invention and mother of necessity. And I think this book really illustrates that. And it illustrates it in a way that's so extreme. You don't have the opportunity to not do it, right? You don't have the opportunity to not try to find another way to feed your crew of 126, right? Or to fend off scurvy. Like you have to find solutions. And it's so foreign to so many of us. Like, love my job, love what I do. I could walk away at any minute. Literally would not matter. Like in the greater scheme, I could just walk away. No one would really care. It would be a hubbub for a week or two and then it would move on. Like in this environment, you don't have those options, which I think is, kind of an interesting framing to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I guess I was also wondering too about like he's balancing this like true story with fiction and also with this just kind of out there thing of like the monster. Like, what do you think is the right balance between like fiction and nonfiction? And like, do you just feel like you have to have that like willing suspension of disbelief kind of thing when you're reading something is fiction and like the monster shows up and you're like, okay, I guess I'm along for the ride?
Yeah, also a question I think about a lot, especially when I think about True Detective, the most recent season. If either of you watched that, it's actually got a lot of parallels to this book in ways.
I haven't watched the most recent one, but the first season is like one of my favorite
first season's
television ever.
Still the best. But this season, I think the fourth season, maybe the fifth, I don't remember. Yeah. Jodie Foster, epic role, which you must see, and her counterpart, amazing actress, set in Alaska. Yeah, when night falls for 30 days and it's like super cold, and there is potentially a supernatural threat to the population. And what I like about what they did in this series of True Detective, and what I like about what Dan Simmons does, is you don't really know. It's not spelled out. It's never like broad daylight and there's a monster in 3 dimensions in front of you. It's always like, was that real? Am I imagining any of this? Could it be a rational explanation? In True Detective, they swing pretty hard to making you think one thing. They swing pretty hard then to explaining it away. Dan Simmons doesn't really do that. It's much more mysterious. And I like that in a book. I like that the loose ends are loose and frayed and you're left wondering. So I don't know if I answered your question, Meredith, but that's definitely something that I'm passionate about when I read a great story.
Cool.
I think, to follow the True Detective piece there, not to get too sidetracked, but I think it's super relevant. I think one of the things that's so haunting, I think about True Detective, talk about like stuff that sticks with you. I think about True Detective, like maybe more than any other TV show I've ever watched in my life. I think because there's 2 scenes in that movie that stick out to me, or there's one line in the movie and then sort of like one additional scene when they say the word something along the lines of, they're talking about like this sort of cult of people who are kidnapping children and abusing them and killing them and all that stuff. And he said, after Katrina, like they did real good. And I'm like, holy moly, that is the like most vile. I know it's like literally the most cringeworthy thing. And then at the end of the season, spoiler, if you haven't listened to never seen True Detective season 1, which is, I don't know, a decade old at this point, that at the end they're sitting there and basically they come to the conclusion that like kind of we did our best, but like they're still out there. We didn't really get really any of it. Like maybe a little bit, but not really. And just those two things of like some force that's that vile that's out there that you know did this horrible thing and then continues to do it. And so, you know, anytime when you're telling a story with sort of frayed ends, to your point, that you have that moment as you leave something with the listener or the viewer that sticks with them for hours, for years, for whatever, and like what a powerful thing to do.
Yeah. And I think what you just said about Katrina and like they did real good after, and what Meredith was talking about, you know, this kind of supernatural entity reminds me of one of the quotes from the book that I really liked and I really think gets at this concept, which is, why does our species always have to take our full measure of God-given misery and terror and mortality and then make it worse? Which I think is just like so good, so true of both True Detective and The Terror.
That's so good. Yeah. I'm much more of an enjoyer of nature than I love exploring. So don't get me wrong, and I've definitely explored enough to put significant punishment upon myself in the extreme hot and extreme cold. But goodness gracious, exploring the Arctic Circle is just not me. And so it's just a fascinating story. I'm curious, Micha, do you think that this type of storytelling, taking something that is real and then creating historical fiction, is something that could be done in B2B? Because historically, it is never done.
It's a good question. I'm just thinking about it a little bit.
Like it's done in Hollywood, right? We have The Social Network. We have, you know, some of these other things, these biopics that people do. But in actual B2B, we've never done it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think it's probably not done, so to speak. But then I think about ads, you know, where like when we create a great ad in B2B, what we want to do is draw from our customers' actual experiences, the pain that they have suffered and, you know, the anxiety that they feel every day. And then we go and make up imaginary story about it or about a similar person, and we tie it all kind of back together loosely. So while I agree, literally, this is not a tactic that we leverage, I think there are hints of the way we draw from true life and then package it up in a fictionalized way to kind of to sell whatever it is we're trying to sell.
Yeah, when we were working on Murder in HR, one of the things that we were thinking about was sort of like HR obviously is a field where so much crazy stuff happens day to day to HR leaders. And you just they can't share it, right? They can't go on a podcast and say certain things. And so we were like, what can we say in this fictional world that they could never say? And I remember I was talking to an HR leader and I was like, oh, you know, this person, you know, the story opens up, this person gets electrocuted at this SKO. And he started laughing. He's like, dude, I have a crazier story than that happened at an SKO. He's like, someone was almost impaled by an umbrella, by like whatever. And I'm like, it's, you know, and so it kind of gave me a little bit of that like moment as a creator, that like warm, tingly feeling in your heart where you're like, oh my gosh, like I could have pushed this even further because the truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, right? And I was like, oh, like I could have got, I'm like, I would have never written that someone gets impaled by an umbrella at a resort. That seems too crazy, right? And he's like, oh no, that literally happened. That this person got impaled and he literally saved the guy's life.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about that for me, I mean, there are a number of them, but one that really comes out is as B2B marketers, we're dry, just like so dry. It's just like, this is the facts and this is the information. And there's not a lot of sometimes packaging or storytelling or creativity or visual design. But we're all, you know, I'm not the first, second, third, 10th, 1000th person to say this, but like we're not companies who buy, we're people who buy. And so, you know, storytelling is intrinsic to our nature. We all like beautiful things and we're all interested in creative expressions. So I do think that there's more room to explore there.
Another thing that jumped out because you love that one scene so much. And I heard this recently. I was listening to a masterclass of I think it was the Aaron Sorkin one. which I've referenced a handful of times because he's great. But he was saying that some of the movies that he creates, that the entire movie is just getting to one scene, like whether it's last 5 minutes, last 10 minutes, or a single scene or whatever. And like, that's the scene. If you can make it to that point, it makes it all worth it. And if you screw that scene up, then it's screwed up. But I was thinking about, you choosing this particular moment in this story. And I was thinking of like, it really does. You could make an argument that like going off on the expedition in and of itself is a very big choice that they made, but that's not really the story. The story is summed up in that meeting, right? In that singular scene where it's like, we're dying. What do we do? And there's so much that you can sort of wrap up in that scene. And that's something that in sort of B2B world, we don't give enough credence to the mega scene, right? It's like we sort of will find all these steps along the way, but not sort of that moment where it's like boss being like, hey, you can tie your name to it, but if it fails, like I don't have your back after that part, or whatever that big moment is.
Yeah, I think that scene has so much to it, to your point. Like even when we think about the kind of the literary themes and the parallels in the work world, as we discussed early on, kind of like the challenge and the resilience in the face of hardship, that's every day you're waking up and things are not better, they're worse. And a lot of companies went through this during the pandemic, like 1 layoff, 2 layoffs, 3 layoffs, sell your business. Like sometimes it just gets worse. I think it also really goes into this topic, that I'm super interested in, which is the world doesn't care. England is going on its merry way while these two ships are, like stuck and like people don't know and they don't care. And like the Native American population nearby doesn't really care. And nobody cares about how hard you're working on it. I think you see that in the meeting. It's just like 10 people who care deeply and the rest of the world is not invested. And I think Meredith mentioned hubris and pride. Like I think hubris and pride is a big part of that meeting, at any meeting like that. Are you brave enough to speak when you have a point of view? Are you maybe going too far and like you should shut yourself down when you really like have crossed lines that probably don't need to be crossed? I think you see all that in that conversation. I think you see the upside of teamwork in those conversations and the flip side of like isolation and, as Dan Simmons would say, madness. Like one person on the ice alone forever, they're going to lose it and they're going to start making bad decisions.
All that matters is we were willing to eat it and it served our needs. Is that about right? But our needs have changed, Lieutenant. We need to ask ourselves, what are we willing to eat next?
And it's your team and it's your community, it's your peers, it's your advisors, it's your board that are going to be like, okay, let's come back together. Let's stay sane. And I think you see that in those environments. I think you see emotional intelligence in those environments, how he leads through those things. And I think you see this concept of persuasion. You can have great ideas, you can make big pitches, but if you're terrible at presenting it, your great idea for how you're going to save 126 people and get your ship out of the ice and get back to civilization, it's going to get washed away by some loudmouth who's a really brilliant orator.
Yeah, that's a great point. What is it? Loudest axle gets the grease. You know what I mean?
Yep. Squeaky wheel. Yep.
Yeah.
Too true.
Well, I love the idea that you said it's sort of like nobody else cares. Something I always think about, when someone's launching a series where it's like, how the launch is not the most important part because it's like nobody's expecting this, literally nobody. So it's not that big a deal. The only for appearance's sake, you obviously want to do a great job with launch and you can do a great job, but like that is the first 100 yards of the marathon. And like, you got to get to mile 1, you got to get to mile 2, you got to make sure that your team is prepared to do all that and then, make it all the way to the finish line. In this case, all the way back. The other thing that I'd say is sort of in that moment, I don't know the maddest you've ever been at someone. Maybe we can't share that story here, but one of the maddest I've ever been in my entire life was I was going on a hike with some friends a couple years ago. It was extremely hot. And one person was like, hey, I'm going to go to this canyon. And we all had walkie-talkies and say, okay, well, we'll meet you on that canyon. And, we get to that canyon and he's not there and the comms aren't working. And sort of we were going to meet at the bottom of these canyons. So we go to the bottom of the canyon and he's not there either. And at that point in time, you have to go back, right? So we had to walk all the way back up the canyon. And it was super hot and backpacks are heavy and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, I literally cursed his name for 2 straight hours. Like every hike up this mountain is probably like, I don't know, 800 feet. And just like every step. And then we get there and we get comms and he's on a further, like another canyon all the way over. I was like, bro, I am not coming. I am going down the mountain and I'm going back. But he literally went 2 canyons over instead of 1. But you could, and I was like a little hungry, like I wasn't starving, I wasn't whatever. But you could imagine those moments, in your sort of, B2B marketing life cycle of the moments where you've tried to push something up a hill so many times and no one will listen to you and no one wants to do those things. And like, yeah, you could quit, but you need these benefits for the thing. And I have a young family, all these other things. And you just want to scream and it's tough. And it's like, those are the moments. Those are the times where it tries people's soul. And if you were to get someone to say, hey, Ian, what do you want to do? That lifeline is super important to give people, I think.
Yeah, super important. The example and the concept to me bring a couple things to mind in the day-to-day work world. The first is, effort impact, the Eisenhower matrix that everybody has seen and talked about a million times. And I can't tell you how much effort I spend trying to talk, I don't mean just JumpCloud, but like teams I've worked with forever, talk them down from doing more work. Like, we don't have to go this big. We don't have to spend this much time, money, effort. It's not going to require it. So like that t-shirt sizing exercise is important. And actually, like, well, how little do we have to invest in this feature launch, or this acquisition or this whatever? Because, marketers will add 10 billion bells and whistles. Nobody cares. Nobody wants them. The CEO will be like, okay, thanks. Why? So I think about that a lot. And I think about, I tell my team all the time, wish we could all, my aim would be work 35 hours a week because we're so good at the 80-20 rule. We know what 20% drives the business. We know that the 80% doesn't matter. So let's go for a hike in the afternoon instead of, working at my desk on some trivial project that no one cares about. And I think that all, if you can manage that, keeps you saner, healthier, increases the longevity of your team, reduces swirls. You don't have to hire and kind of onboard new folks. That sanity management is a huge part of leadership, I think. And I can only imagine, in that situation where the stakes are much higher, stranded in the ice, supernatural threat, scurvy, dissent and mutiny, like
death is slow in the great white nothing, and 134 starved men will turn devil against you, starting with the ones you hold closest.
Oh boy, you really got to think very carefully about every effort that you're going to invest, right? Every time you give an order, because y'all know the leaders, they take your orders super seriously. So every word you say, you got to manage the expectations.
Yeah, that sense of, I think part of the reason why this is such a great story is I think it's really hard to explain what cold is. It's really hard to explain what hungry is. Even if you've been really hungry, even if you've been really cold, to put someone who is well fed and not cold in that moment, I think is really hard to do. But we know what stuck feels like. And we know that's why he had this external threat. We know what dread feels like. We know what collapse feels like, an impending doom, and how scary that is in the unknown. And that's the thing that I think having that external threat is core to this. That's why he added it, right?
That's right.
Because it wouldn't be the same story without it. And it gives you a little bit extra that I think is needed.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. And the same, like the polar bear, supernatural creatures, one thing. And then you mentioned hungry, and we all know what that feels like. But I love in the story that he complicates the hunger problem, right? There's obviously nothing growing, very little to hunt. Complicates it by saying, oh, you have a ship full of food, but it's all contaminated.
Advise Mr. Wall and Mr. Diggle that they should emphasize salt meats in their menus now, not the tins. We must start to preserve all things portable now.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to really, and people will, right? They get hungry enough, they're going to eat food that they know is going to kill them. And it's just also a horrible quote dilemma, right? Well, you could be hungry or you could be sick and throwing up all over. You choose which one do you want.
Okay. Any other final thoughts on the terror?
I think we covered all the key elements that I care about. I love that Meredith talked about Dan Simmons' crankiness and the the lean in and originality. I think as B2B marketers, that's probably the saddest, like biggest opportunities. We all just do the safe data driven, ads, program, webinar, whatever. I think the perseverance in the face of challenge is the classic startup hiring concept, right? You're going to fail. You're going to fail a ton of times. Your job's going to change all over the place. There's practically no path to success that we can tell you. You just got to keep throwing yourself at it, but back to creative and lateral problem solving. So I'm really happy we talked about that a bit. I feel like we covered all the key themes. Oh, I got one more that I want to cover real fast.
Yeah.
We didn't really talk about hubris that much, or leadership, or the risk of it. And I think, Dan Simmons does a great job in this book talking about that and illustrating it. That the leaders, Francis Crozier, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and Sir John Franklin, they're like these ambitious dudes who want to be famous. They think they're so smart, to your point earlier. They think they've got the best modern technology. They think they can conquer this unforgiving landscape.
What plans have you made, Sir John?
All kinds of plans, of course.
In case the ships are ice-locked.
Oh, we are amply provisioned for 3 years and up to 5 with strict rationing.
Your rescue plan. What is your rescue plan?
It sounds to me like, a million cocky startup founders who I've met.
Right.
Like, we've got better tech. I'm smarter. Like, we're capable. And ultimately that hubris and that confidence flips. It turns into despair and doom. And we hear that and see that all the time, right? The startup stats about how many startups make it, to unicorn status or make it to being acquired or whatever. The stats are really, really low. And I think that leadership pride thing is a real key theme to the story. And for me as a leader, I have to keep it in mind for myself, but I also have to manage up, right, to startup founders. And I need to think about like who they are and how they've got there. Because what every VC will tell you is that startup founder who you think is like wild or crazy or like obsessed, that's why they invested in these guys. Mm-hmm. They invested because of the obsession, not because they're, to a junior marketer, like crazy and shiny penny syndrome, and they want something every day that's different. I think that's an interesting part of the story.
Yeah, to me, my final sort of takeaway on the whole thing is you need that the expedition is, and others may disagree, the expedition is not about getting there. It's about getting back. And like, that is the goal, right? Is like, I look at Apollo 13. There's a reason why we love Apollo 13 is because they didn't make it to the moon, but they made it back home. And that is far more important than if they had made it to the moon and not made it for some people, right? And so in the business world, you want to make it home. It's not moonshot or bust.
Well, it also just calls out the differences in founders, C-suite executives who have different kinds of interests in an organization and the everyday person who don't care about the acquisition, who don't have options to make it meaningful. What success looks like for each of those different layers and people, so different.
Yeah, and I think that there's an endless array of different types of leaders, I think, being born every day with sort of how some of the games have changed with, goal setting and all of that. And it'll be exciting to see what this next generation of leaders kind of comes with. I think it'll be different. Mike, I have one final question for you. It's been wonderful chatting with you. You used to be a buyer on the book side. Now you're a CMO, which in some ways you're a buyer, but you're also a seller, obviously, because you're selling your software, but you're also buying other stuff. What's just one piece of advice to CMOs about being a buyer and about making purchasing decisions, and especially when it comes to creative? Because I think that so often it is the most complex thing that you buy. Like a software, there's probably a competitor that's pretty close. But when you're investing in creative, there's a ton of different outcomes and there's a ton of different options.
Super hard question, reminiscent of a couple other hard questions we talked about in here. I think on the procurement technology side, buying is relatively straightforward. You've got a couple suppliers, you've got, cash in your hand, they've got a cost, you're negotiating. It's a pretty straightforward process, and it comes down to math in many cases. On the creative side, totally different animal. There's no procurement team in the world that can help you. Your CFO is going to shrug their shoulder and say, I don't know, you're the marketer. So you're going to have to, much like Dan Simmons, in this episode, right? You're going to have some kind of vision. You have to trust your gut. You're going to have to get bold and go places that maybe other people aren't really ready for you to try.
I love it. Awesome. Thanks, Michael. We really appreciate coming on the show and just having a wonderful conversation and bringing us the terror. For our listeners, I can tell you what's not a terror, JumpCloud. So if you want to give a nudge to your IT team and show them an open directory platform for secure, frictionless access from any device to any resources anywhere, go to jumpcloud.com. Any final thoughts?
It's been great. Thanks both. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Take care. Well, that's it for today. I hope you got some good ideas for your B2B content. Thank you for listening to Remarkable. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. Remarkable is created by the team at Caspian Studios, B2B podcast as a service. Caspian also creates fiction series for B2B companies, so if you want a business thriller, you can learn more at caspianstudios.com. Hollywood-style storytelling for B2B. And in today's episode, you heard from myself, Ian Faison, and Meredith O'Neill, senior producer here at Caspian Studios. Remarkable was produced this week by Meredith O'Neill, mixed by Scott Goodrich, and our theme song is Solomon by Falak. Be remarkable and rise above the noise.